They offered him $80,000 for that field. Cash, up front, no waiting, no risk, just sign and walk away. Most people wouldn't think twice, especially not for land like that. A wheat field that looked average, nothing special, nothing worth holding on to, at least not in that moment. So when he said no, it didn't make sense. People started talking. Not quietly, either, because turning down that kind of money for something like that felt reckless. Some said he was stubborn. Others said he didn't understand what he was walking away from. A few just called him crazy. And maybe, at the time, it looked that way, because no one else was seeing what he saw. Not yet. But a few months later, when the drought hit, that decision didn't look crazy anymore. From the outside, there was nothing special about that field. Same wheat, same soil, same kind of yield you'd expect from any other farm in that area. It wasn't failing, but it wasn't thriving either. Just steady, predictable, the kind of land people don't usually hold on to. When a good offer comes in, and $80,000 was more than a good offer, it was an easy decision. At least, that's how everyone else saw it. Because in that moment, there was no reason to expect anything different. The seasons had been normal. Rainfall had been consistent. And nothing about the land suggested it was about to matter more than anything around it. So when buyers came in, they weren't taking a risk. They were making a smart move, securing land while it was still reasonably priced. And from the outside, it looked like he was letting that opportunity pass, holding on to something ordinary instead of taking something guaranteed. But what most people didn't realize was that he wasn't looking at the present. He was paying attention to patterns, small changes, the kind you don't notice unless you've seen what happens next. Because sometimes what looks average is just waiting for the moment everything around it starts to struggle. At first, no one thought much of it. A few dry weeks. Less rain than usual. Nothing serious. Not yet. The fields still looked fine. The crops were holding. And the people who had bought land felt good about their decision, because everything still looked the same. But then the rain didn't come back. Weeks turned into months. The ground started to change. Not all at once, but slowly. Cracks forming where the soil used to hold. Moisture disappearing faster than it should. And the wheat started showing it. First in patches, then across entire fields. Yields dropped. Growth slowed. And for the first time, people started to get concerned. Because now, it wasn't just a dry spell. It was becoming something else. Something that didn't fix itself quickly. And that's when the pressure started. Farmers looking for ways to save what they could. Some trying to irrigate. Others watching their crops fail with no way to stop it. And suddenly, that $80,000 offer didn't look like something to turn down. It looked like something you should have taken, because the land they had invested in was starting to lose value, right in front of them. And from the outside, his decision still didn't make sense, because if anything, it looked worse now than it did before. Like he had held on to the wrong thing at exactly the wrong time. But what they couldn't see yet was that not all land reacts the same way, and not all decisions are made for the moment you're in. His field didn't dry out the same way. Not at first, and then not at all like the others. While nearby land started to crack, his held. The surface didn't break the same. The wheat didn't thin out as quickly, and the difference wasn't obvious unless you knew where to look, because it wasn't just the crop, it was the soil underneath it. Years earlier, he had worked it differently, not for quick results, but for what it could hold over time, building it up slowly, letting it retain moisture instead of losing it, making it deeper, more stable. The kind of soil that doesn't depend on constant rain to survive. So when the drought came, his field didn't react like the rest. It didn't collapse under pressure. It absorbed it. Because what looked like an average field before was actually something most people hadn't recognized. Resilient. And resilience doesn't show up when everything is going right. It shows up when everything else starts to fail. That's what he had seen coming. Not the drought itself, but what it would expose. And for the first time, the difference wasn't subtle anymore. It was undeniable. By the time the drought reached its worst, the difference was impossible to ignore. Fields around him, dry, thin, some already lost, entire sections that wouldn't recover. The kind of loss you can't fix in a season. But his, still standing, not perfect, not untouched, but holding. Green where others had turned pale, full where others had faded. And for the first time, people stopped looking at his decision like a mistake, because now they could see what it had protected. While others were trying to save what was left, he was harvesting what still remained. And that changed everything. The same field that didn't seem worth keeping was now one of the few still producing. And the value of it wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real. Because in a year where supply dropped, what survived mattered more than anything else. And suddenly, that $80,000 didn't look like a missed opportunity. It looked small compared to what that field had become. And the people who had called him crazy were the ones asking questions, trying to understand how he had seen it coming. But standing there, watching a field that had outlasted everything around it, there was only one thing left to realize. He hadn't avoided the risk. He had prepared for it. After that, no one called him crazy anymore. Not for keeping the land, not for turning down the offer, and not for seeing something others didn't, because in the end, nothing about his decision had been impulsive. It wasn't stubbornness. It wasn't luck. And it definitely wasn't a guess. It was understanding. Understanding that not every season stays the same. That conditions change, sometimes slowly, and sometimes all at once. And when they do, what looked average before doesn't stay average. It either holds or it doesn't. Most people had made their decision based on what they saw in the moment. What the land was worth right then. What it could produce under normal conditions. But he wasn't thinking about normal. He was thinking about what would happen when things weren't. Standing there, after everything had played out, he understood something most people only realize after it's too late. That the difference between a risky decision and a smart one isn't always visible at the start. Sometimes it only shows up when everything else begins to fail. And sometimes that's all it takes.